The Charlotte Hornets grab a miraculous come from behind win against a promising Houston Rockets team. I'll talk about it more, but first, I have to talk about my lack of preseason coverage. I didn't cover the Hornets preseason because it's basically like a Summer League 2.0. A lot of the star players aren't really playing for real, or they don't really play at all, and for the most part, it's just a bunch of G League type of guys trying to make their way onto a roster, and that's just not high quality basketball. I couldn't forego the high leverage WNBA playoffs to cover that. But I watched the Charlotte Hornets preseason and saw some things that I liked. The big standout was Trey Mann going crazy off the bench, and I'm glad that so far through one regular season game, it's translating. Now, time to get closer to talking about the game by talking about the pre-game injury report. Daquan Jeffries was out with a right hand fracture. Hopefully he gets better, but I'm not really looking at him to be a make or break guy for this team. Josh Green was out with left Achilles soreness, and the sitting or resting of Josh Green has been going on since early in the preseason. I'm really hoping that he gets better because I'm looking at him to be the starting 3-and-D shooting guard next to LaMelo that the Hornets have been missing for some time. If they go with that approach, the owners see Brandon Miller as a shooting guard, and he even started at the 2 in this game, so that's something to look out for. Then the most impactful absence is Mark Williams, out with a left foot injury, and I wouldn't say that I'm worried about Mark. That's not the first word that comes into my mind. I would just say that I'm frustrated because he's just never on the court, and with Jalen Duren having a 13-and-13 double-double game in his first game of the season, it's hard to feel like the Hornets didn't pick the right center. Hindsight is 2020, but the Mark Williams pick hasn't really been the best so far. Good player, but he just can't stay on the court. Apparently, he's participating in on-court activities, so hopefully he's ready to go soon because watching Nick Richards in the starting lineup is brutal. Now, getting into the game, Cody Martin and Nick Richards had to fill in for Josh Green and Mark Williams in the starting lineup. In the first quarter, a thing that I liked was the LaMelo and Brandon two-man game. It only happened like 2 times, but they both led to scores. The play that I liked the most was when LaMelo passed up an open 3 to give it to Brandon for an open 3, which he made and got an and 1. LaMelo is going to turn it on in the second half, always. So I love that he tried to get his teammates involved early in the game because he can't beat this talented of a Rockets team by himself. He's going to need his teammates. So I like that. But that was the only positive to come from this quarter. Nick Richards got worked by Şengün. He was able to get like a block because he's athletic, but Nick was just getting back down, out-rebounded and overpowered by Şengün so much that he got in early foul trouble trying to contain him. But even when they brought Diabate in, he couldn't guard Şengün. Richards and Diabate aren't the best centers, definitely wouldn't start them, but this was more of a case of Şengün being really good than them being awful. Like, they tried, but they just don't have the physicality to deal with him, which is where Mark would be very useful. His defense took a step back last season, but that was mostly like defensive awareness wise, and when he was taken out of the paint. He was still a good shot blocker and interior defender, which would be useful against Şengün's playstyle where he was just backing down Nick Richards. So there was no defense for Şengün, and the offense just completely fell off a cliff when LaMelo wasn't in the game, and more specifically when Micic was in the game, which was something that carried over from the preseason. He couldn't hit a shot and he was turning the ball over. Like, this guy had a fall from grace. When the Hornets went on that like 5-1 stretch last season with the new players, Micic was a big part of that, but he just fell off a cliff ever since then. He was hyped up to be this EuroLeague MVP, and I thought that he could be a good addition to the team, especially at the backup point guard spot, because Europeans are more technically sound and they play the game the right way. Plus, he's 30 years old and an MVP, but none of that really translated so far, so that's upsetting to see. In the second quarter, This is when Brandon Miller went out with left hip soreness unexpectedly, and as of right now, there hasn't really been any updates. In this quarter, the Hornets went down by 18 points, mainly because LaMelo's threes weren't falling. So one thing that I liked is when he stopped all of that shooting and just barreled his way to the rim, which should be more of an option for him. Like, he's a 6'7" guard, and he was getting foul calls tonight, which will probably encourage him to go to the rim more. In the third quarter, it was all about adjustments. First off, Micic and Mann played better, so that really helped. But I would say that the adjustment of the game was putting Grant Williams on Şengün. Sure, he's shorter, but he has immovable enforcer on Hall of Fame, and it was tough for Şengün to back him down. One play that summed up his impact nicely was when he was playing good defense on Şengün, not letting him get to the rim, forcing him into this tough hook shot thing that Diabate was able to block. That defense was so impactful. Then for the fourth quarter, staying on the defensive end, I love how they started it off with active hands, doubling Şengün and even stealing the ball from him. Like, they had the Rockets looking scared, looking like a young team. The defense to open the fourth quarter was just what the Hornets needed. Then for my last takeaway, I liked how LaMelo and Tre Mann responded to the Van Vliet comeback attempt. There was a point in this game where Van Vliet looked like he was going to be that calming veteran presence for the young Rockets and take them home in the clutch after having a bad game for the most part. But Tre Mann was able to go band for band with Van Vliet, just running a two-man game with Nick Richards getting favorable switches and going at the mismatches. He and LaMelo really closed this game out nicely. Now it's time to get into player performance grades, and these are relative to expectations. So if a role player gets a higher grade than a starter, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were better than the starter. Cody Martin is going to get a C+. I've already said what I had to say about him. Bad offensive player, the three-point shooting is massively overrated, hasn't really shot well since his breakout season in 21-22, and even in that season, he didn't shoot it well because 38% is good for someone that's shooting like 8 threes a game, but when he's only shooting like 1 or 2 threes a game, that's not good. Also, his defense for the past 2 seasons has been below league average, and he's not the person that he's hyped up to be. And even in this game, he didn't shoot the best, and there were plays that I didn't like when he was looking off LaMelo and not hitting him on cuts. But even with all of that, he wasn't terrible. Like, he wasn't the reason why the Hornets went down by 18 points. And I've got to say that he contributed on the boards, and he was valuable for sure on a night where the Hornets were giving up a lot of offensive rebounds. Miles Bridges is going to get a B for the same reason that Cody got a C+. He was a force on the boards as well, but he gets a higher grade because he wasn't as much of a liability as Cody was on both sides. Like, he really settled into his role of being somewhat of a connecting piece rather than the main scoring guy, even when Brandon went out. Like, he just let Melo and Mann take over in the clutch, and he tried his best to contribute defensively. Nick Richards is going to get an F. He played a bit better in the second half, but ultimately, he couldn't guard Şengün, especially in the first half. And even when he was good at points, it was when Şengün wasn't in the game. There were plays where it wasn't Richards' fault, like he just got overpowered, but that doesn't mean that he had a good performance. Like, Charles Lee literally had to switch the matchups because Richards couldn't guard Şengün. Brandon Miller is going to get an I. I'm adding a new grade in. I means injury, so I don't feel good about giving him an actual grade. He was good in the first quarter, nice poster slam, nice and one three-pointer, but that was really it, and he didn't play in the second half, so there's not really a lot to grade him on. LaMelo Ball gets an easy A+. There were some slight negatives I could say about LaMelo, like the three-point shooting not necessarily being all the way there. 4 of 12 from three-point distance, made some, missed some. Also, he had a turnover in the fourth quarter, which could have been really costly. Like, that was when the game was really in the balance. But those were only minor negatives. 34-point near triple-double, 11 assists to only 2 turnovers, and he had a player impact estimate of 25.6, which is some Nikola Jokic type stuff. He controlled the game really well from start to finish and found other ways to impact the game when his shot was off, like driving to the rim, getting to the free throw line, and playmaking for others. Moussa Diabate is going to get an F. Copy everything that I said about Nick Richards. Probably wasn't his fault that he couldn't guard Şengün, but yeah, he just wasn't the answer. Vasilije Micic is going to get a D. The only thing that saved him was in the third quarter when he strung together like 3 or so good plays in a crucial time. If it weren't for that, he would get an easy F. Tre Mann is going to get an easy A+. Started off bad in the first quarter, but he got back to looking like the Tre Mann that I got accustomed to seeing in the preseason. Very nice spark plug off the bench, and he hit some big shots in the fourth quarter for sure. Grant Williams is going to get an A, and I would say that while he wasn't a star like LaMelo, he was probably the most impactful player of the game. Şengün scored 19 points in the first half. Then, when Grant became his primary defender, Şengün only scored 6 points the rest of the way because Grant wasn't getting back down. Like, he forced Şengün into taking some tough shots for sure. Finally, Seth Curry is going to get a B. He was fine out there. He hit some threes, played some extended minutes without Brandon, and yeah, he was all right. And that's all of the players to grade. Surprisingly, no T. John after his impressive preseason, even with all of the absences, which doesn't make me confident about his playing time in the future. But also, to see another side of this, the Hornets were trying to come back from an 18-point deficit. Maybe if they had like an 18-point lead of their own, then T. John could have got some minutes to experiment with. Also, strategically, I don't really see his place in this matchup. Definitely not the Şengün answer, and the forwards weren't really the problem. It was mainly Şengün and the guards, so I'll give Charles Lee that. But yeah, that was the game. Hornets played the Atlanta Hawks on Friday, I-85 showdown, and it's LaMelo versus Tre, so hopefully they have better performances than in the last time they played, which was on opening night of last season. Like, they were so abominable in that game. Really hoping for a healthier team, a good game, and a Hornets win. But yeah, that is all for now.